He walked in laughing. That's the first thing I need you to understand. Not apologetic, not rushing, not even glancing around to find me. He walked through the door of Harlow's Bar and Grill on my 38th birthday with his hand on his buddy's shoulder, mid-laugh, like he'd just come from the best time of his life. Which, I suppose, he had. I'd been sitting in that booth for 2 hours and 47 minutes. I know the exact number, because I'd been watching the clock on my phone the way you watch a pot that won't boil. 2 hours and 47 minutes in a booth meant for two, with a melting candle the hostess had lit for me out of pity. A glass of water I'd refilled 4 times, and a bread basket I couldn't touch because my stomach had turned itself inside out somewhere around the 90-minute mark. His name was my husband of 9 years, my husband who had promised me dinner, who had texted me at noon that day, "Don't make any plans tonight. I've got something special for your birthday," and then gone completely silent until I arrived at the restaurant at 7, dressed in the green wrap dress he always said he loved, expecting to find him already at the table. He wasn't, so I waited. The couple next to me shared a plate of nachos and kept stealing glances at me with that particular kind of sympathy that feels worse than being ignored. The hostess, a young woman with a blonde ponytail named, according to her badge, Kelsey, came by twice to ask if I wanted to order an appetizer while I waited. I said no thank you both times. The third time she came, she just quietly set a small birthday dessert on the edge of my table, a chocolate lava cake with a single candle, and said, "It's on the house." I almost cried. I thanked her and stared at it until the candle burned down on its own. Then the door opened and he walked in laughing. His friend, I'll call him his friend, though the word had stopped meaning anything to me years earlier, was laughing too. They were doing that shoulder grab thing men do when something is genuinely funny to them, and my husband had this loose, easy expression on his face that I hadn't seen him wear at home in longer than I could remember. He spotted me a few seconds after I spotted him. The laugh didn't stop immediately. It sort of faded, like he'd turned a dial down slowly. He slid into the booth across from me and said, "Hey, sorry, lost track of time." 5 words. No flowers, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the melted candle or the uneaten bread or the 2 hours and 47 minutes I had just spent alone on my birthday in a restaurant booth waiting for him like I had nowhere better to be. No one else who wanted me there. I looked at him across the table and I said, "It's fine." And the terrible thing is that I meant it, or I'd trained myself to mean it. I'm still not entirely sure which. We met when I was 28. I was working in HR at a mid-size logistics company outside of Columbus, Ohio. He was in operations, recently promoted, confident in the way men who've just been told they're good at something tend to be. He asked me out in the break room on a Wednesday, and I said yes, because he was funny, and he had kind eyes, and because 28-year-old me had no reason to look for warning signs she didn't know to look for yet. The first year was wonderful. I'm not saying that to be fair to him or to myself. I'm saying it because it's true, and because the wonderful year is the thing that made everything after it so hard to leave. He was attentive. He remembered things, what I'd said in passing about my mother's health, which neighborhood in Columbus I'd grown up in, the name of the professor I'd had a falling out with in college. He showed up when he said he would. He planned things. He made me feel, for the first time in my adult life, like I was someone worth paying careful attention to. We got married 3 years in. Small ceremony, outside, late September, my best friend. I'll call her my best friend, though by the time I'm writing this, she'd become something closer to a lifeline, was my maid of honor. She gave a toast that made everyone laugh and then cry. I wore my grandmother's earrings. He cried when I walked down the aisle. I am telling you the good parts so you understand what I was holding on to. Because here's the thing about a relationship that turns controlling slowly, you don't notice it in the moment. You only notice it later when you try to map the timeline and realize you can't quite identify the first time it happened. It's like standing in a room while someone turns the heat up 1 degree at a time. By the time it's unbearable, you've been sweating so long you've started to think this is just what rooms feel like. The first thing I gave up was my Thursday night book club. It wasn't dramatic. He just mentioned, casually, that Thursday nights were the only time we could have dinner together, given his new work schedule. And wasn't it more important to prioritize us? I said yes. The book club met for another 8 months, and then folded. I wasn't there for any of it. Then it was my friendships. Not directly, not with a rule or an ultimatum, just friction. "You're going out again?" said in a tone that made me feel guilty for wanting to. Or he'd be in a mood when I got home. And the mood would last 2, 3, 4 days. And eventually I learned that staying home was easier than managing what I came back to. The silent treatment was his sharpest tool. He never yelled, never broke anything. He would simply go quiet. Not cold exactly, but distant, turned off, like a light switch had flipped. And that silence would expand through our house like water finding every crack in the floor. I could never predict how long it would last. 2 days, a week, once, 10 days. I'd spent the whole time thinking about what I'd done wrong, retracing the argument, apologizing even when I didn't know what I was apologizing for, just to make it stop. My best friend pointed it out once, carefully, a couple years in. She said, "You apologize to him a lot. Do you notice that?" I said, "That's just how I communicate." She didn't push. I wish she had. But I also think I wasn't ready to hear it. By year 5, my social world had compressed to almost nothing. By year 7, I was managing my schedule around his moods. By year 8, I had stopped applying for jobs I was qualified for because when I'd mentioned a particularly good opportunity once, a director-level position at a nonprofit in Cincinnati, more money, a title I'd worked toward for years, he'd gotten quiet for 6 days and then told me, very calmly, that it seemed like I was trying to blow up our life for my ego. I withdrew the application. I'm telling you all of this because I need you to understand what I was carrying into that restaurant on my birthday. I need you to understand that when I said it's fine, I wasn't stupid or broken or without self-respect. I was exhausted in the way you get exhausted when you've been fighting something invisible for so long that you start to forget what it felt like not to be tired. I found the notebook in late October, about 4 months after the birthday dinner. He'd been traveling for work more frequently, which I'd accepted because I'd trained myself to accept most things, and I was reorganizing the home office one afternoon while he was in Dallas. There was a filing cabinet in the corner that he kept locked, but the lock was a cheap one, the kind that comes standard with furniture, and the key had been on his key ring so long I think he'd stopped noticing it. He'd left the whole ring on the kitchen counter when he rushed out that morning. I want to be careful here about my own motivations. I didn't go looking for anything. I was reorganizing. I moved the filing cabinet to vacuum behind it, and the drawer slid half open from the shift in weight, and the notebook was right there on top of a manila folder. It was an ordinary composition notebook, the black and white marble kind you can buy at any Target for $1.50. His handwriting on the inside cover. I wish I could tell you I put it back without reading it. I sat on the floor of that office for 45 minutes. It wasn't a diary. It wasn't letters. It was a system. I couldn't think of another word for it. A record he had apparently been keeping for years, tracking my behavior in columns he'd labeled things like compliance, mood, social activity, challenge frequency. Every column had dates. Some had notes. Pushed back on vacation plans. Score down. Agreed to cancel dinner with her friend. Score up. There was a separate section he'd titled, in his neat small handwriting, recalibration tools, and under it a list. Silent treatment. Restricted access to shared accounts. Remind her of past failures. Isolate from outside influence. I read it 3 times. Then I put it back exactly where I found it, locked the drawer, put the key back on the ring, and went and sat at the kitchen table for a very long time. I called my best friend that evening. I didn't tell her about the notebook. Not yet. I just said, I need to talk to you. And she said, I'll come over. And I said, not here. And she understood that without me having to explain it. We met for coffee the next morning, a place across town we didn't usually go. I sat down, ordered a black coffee, and said, I think I've been in an abusive relationship for 9 years, and I've only just understood what that word means. She put her hand over mine. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, Okay, what do you need to do first? That one question changed everything. Not because it was profound, but because it was profound. But because it was practical. She didn't treat me like a victim who needed comforting. She treated me like a person who needed a plan. And something about that, the normalness of it, the lack of drama, made the whole terrifying thing feel survivable. The first thing I needed to do was understand my finances. This was harder than it should have been. In the last several years, his income had grown substantially while mine had stagnated from that withdrawn Cincinnati application and the ones I'd stopped submitting after it. He managed our joint accounts. I had a separate checking account I'd mostly stopped using. I had a 401k through work that I'd contributed to steadily throughout our marriage, which I only later understood had been a kind of accidental lifeline. I made an appointment with a family law attorney the following week. I went during my lunch hour and paid for the consultation with my personal credit card, a card he didn't know existed, one I'd opened years earlier for small purchases and largely forgotten about. The attorney, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who had clearly heard every version of the story, walked me through Ohio's equitable distribution laws, what I was likely entitled to, what the process would look like. She told me to start documenting everything and to not change my behavior at home until I was ready to move. I took notes. I went back to work. I sat through an afternoon of meetings with my face perfectly composed. That night I made dinner and asked my husband about his trip to Dallas and listened to him talk and said the right things at the right times. And when he went to bed, I sat in the kitchen and looked at the wall for a while and thought about the person I used to be before I learned to perform normalcy like a second job. I spent the next 2 months preparing. I opened a new savings account at a credit union across town, not the bank we used together. I started transferring small amounts each paycheck, nothing dramatic, nothing that would register. I reconnected, quietly, with the friends I'd let fall away. A lunch here, a coffee there. Not mentioning any of it at home because I'd learned the art of not mentioning things. I also went back to applying for jobs. The Cincinnati opportunity was long gone, but there were others. I put in applications during my lunch breaks, updated my resume with the help of a former colleague who owed me a favor, and interviewed for a senior HR manager position at a healthcare company in Dublin, Ohio, close enough to stay in the city, significant enough to matter. I got a call back in early December, a phone screen, then a panel interview, then a final round with the department head. The offer came through the second week of December, $22,000 more than I was currently making, full benefits, a title I'd been working toward for a decade. I didn't tell my husband. I accepted quietly. Started date was January 15th. He found out the Friday before Christmas when my new employer called the house landline. I'd forgotten I'd listed it as a secondary contact and left a voicemail confirming my onboarding paperwork. He came into the kitchen with his phone. He played the voicemail on speaker without saying anything. Then he looked at me and said, "You took a job." I said, "Yes." He waited for more. I didn't give it to him. The silence that followed was familiar. I recognized it like an old piece of furniture. The shape of it, the weight. He let it expand. He went to the other room. He stayed quiet through dinner. He was still quiet the next morning. The difference was that this time, I didn't apologize into it. I let it sit. I went to my mother's for Christmas, told him I'd be back on the 27th, and left him the silence to do whatever he wanted with. When I came back, he'd apparently decided we needed to talk. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table I'd sat at 2 months earlier, staring at the wall, and told me that I had made a unilateral decision that affected both of us, that I hadn't respected the partnership of our marriage, that he was disappointed in my dishonesty. He said it calmly and evenly, the way he said most things, in a tone that expected agreement. I let him finish. Then I said, I found the notebook in October. The room changed. I want to describe his face in that moment. But the honest truth is that I wasn't looking at his face. I was looking at my own hands, flat on the table, and I was thinking about how still they were. I had expected to be shaking. I wasn't shaking at all. I told him I knew about the scoring system. I told him I knew about the recalibration tools. I told him I knew about the compliance column and the social activity column and the notes he'd made, dated and categorized, over what appeared to be at least 4 years of our marriage. He started to say something. I kept going. I told him I had spoken with an attorney. I told him I had an account he didn't know about, and a job starting January 15th and a storage unit across town where I'd been moving the things I wanted to keep. I told him that I didn't hate him. And that part was true, which surprised me when I heard myself say it, but that I understood now that I had been living inside a system designed to make me smaller, and that I was not willing to do that anymore. I told him I wanted a divorce. He did the silence thing. Old reflex. I watched it happen and felt nothing in particular. Then he said, "You won't be able to afford this house on your own." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because after everything, after the notebook and the scored columns and the 4 years of documented manipulation, that was the sentence he reached for. The money. The house. The practical threat. I said, I know, I don't want the house. He didn't have an answer for that. The divorce took 7 months. It was not easy and it was not clean. He hired an attorney who was aggressive in the particular way that people use when they're trying to regain control through the only mechanism left available. There were arguments about assets, about retirement accounts, about the furniture and the car, and the 15 things that suddenly became symbolic of something larger. My attorney was steady throughout. I made decisions slowly and carefully and tried not to let any of it pull me back into the old patterns of managing his emotions. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Clintonville in March. My best friend helped me move. It took one Saturday and a rented U-Haul and a lot of takeout pizza, and when we'd put the last box down in the living room, she sat on the floor and looked around and said, "This is going to be a good place," and I sat down next to her and thought, yes, I think it is. I started the new job in January as planned. The people were decent. The work was hard in the satisfying way work sometimes is. I ate lunch outside on warm days, and no one tracked my schedule or questioned where I'd been. And I got through each week and then each month and kept waiting for the other shoe to drop and slowly started to understand that there was no other shoe. The final papers came through in September. I signed them at my kitchen table with a coffee that had gone cold and a pen I'd gotten free from a bank. And outside the window, the neighbor's tree was just starting to turn. The first few leaves going orange at the tips, and I sat there for a minute after I'd signed and just looked out at it. 9 years. A scored notebook. A birthday candle that burned down by itself. And a woman in a green wrap dress who had sat in a restaurant booth for 2 hours and 47 minutes and said it's fine and mostly meant it. She's not who I am now. I don't say that to be dramatic. I say it because it's the only honest thing I can tell you about what happens when you finally walk away from something that was slowly making you disappear. You don't become a different person overnight. You don't wake up healed and whole on the other side. You wake up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Clintonville with boxes you haven't unpacked and a job you're still figuring out and a bank account that is entirely, uncomplicatedly yours. And some mornings, that is enough. Some mornings that is a thing. I've thought a lot about the woman who sat in that booth. Not with pity. I've worked hard not to pity her, but with something closer to tenderness. She was doing the best she knew how, with the information she had. She had been told in 100 small and incremental ways that her value was conditional, that love looked like this, that if she could just be a little more agreeable, a little less demanding, a little more patient, eventually things would even out. She was wrong, but she didn't know she was wrong, and that is not the same thing as weakness. If you are sitting in a booth somewhere right now, waiting for someone who told you to be there, who told you not to make plans, who is 47 minutes late and not answering your messages, I am not going to tell you what to do. You will figure it out when you're ready. You might not be ready today. That's okay too. But I want you to know that ready does eventually come. And when it does, you won't be shaking either. I've spent a lot of time thinking about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in a dramatic way. Not sitting by a window in the rain connecting dots on a conspiracy board. Just quietly, the way you do when you finally have a kitchen that's yours and no one's mood to manage before breakfast. Here's what I keep coming back to. Nothing that happened to me was random, and nothing that happened to him was either. He built a system. He was meticulous about it. The columns, the dates, the scoring. He put genuine effort into making himself the center of gravity in my life, the thing everything else had to orbit around. And for years it worked. I canceled the book club. I withdrew the job application. I said it's fine to a melted birthday candle, and meant it. Or close enough to meaning it that I stopped checking. But here's the thing about systems built on control. They require the other person to stay small. And people don't stay small forever. Not really. Something in us keeps reaching, even when we've been told there's no room. The notebook didn't make me leave. I want to be clear about that. The notebook just put language to something I already felt in my body. A low, constant hum of wrongness I'd been explaining away for years. What actually made me leave was the moment I sat on that office floor, read those columns, and realized I had not imagined any of it. That my instincts had been correct the whole time. That I wasn't too sensitive or too demanding or too difficult. I had simply been paying attention to the right thing. My best friend asked me what I needed to do first, and that question mattered more than she probably knows. Because the answer was, think clearly. And I hadn't thought clearly in years. I'd been using all my mental energy managing someone else's emotions, predicting his moods, preemptively apologizing for things I hadn't done yet. When I finally redirected that energy toward myself, toward the credit union, the attorney, the job applications, the storage unit, I was genuinely surprised by how capable I turned out to be. That's the part nobody tells you. It's not that leaving is easy. It isn't, but the capacity was always there. It had just been pointed in the wrong direction. I think about Kelsey sometimes, the hostess who lit that birthday candle for me. She didn't know my name or my situation. She just saw a woman sitting alone on what was obviously supposed to be a special night, and she did something small and decent. That lava cake I couldn't eat. I've thought about it more times than makes sense. There's something to that. The small, decent things we do for each other matter more than we realize in the moment we do them. What I know now, on the other side of all of it, is that integrity compounds. Every honest choice I made during those 2 months, every careful, quiet, deliberate step, built something real. The apartment in Clintonville, the job, the bank account with my name only on it. The morning I signed the final papers and looked out at a tree turning orange and felt, for the first time in almost a decade, like the future was mine to figure out. He scored me in columns. I built a life anyway. That's not a small thing.